sorry, the number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number or try your call again. This is a recording.
Are you listening?
Hello there.
I'm Darius.
And I'm Sam.
And welcome to the Oxford Youth Podcast. This podcast is by young people, for young people, just to talk about the things that we care about.
We're here to give you a voice, whether that's the voice of your creativity, your professionalism, or just something that you're doing that you feel needs to be spoken about.
And if you want to get in touch and actually get on this podcast, you really can.
We don't bite. I mean, we promise.
And we promise. But the real question here is, are you listening?
I mean, are you listening?
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Let's just get on into the podcast. Welcome back to the Black Lives Matter mini-series. There are some themes within this mini-series that may be upsetting to you. If it is triggering to you, themes of racism, bullying, and various other things, please we implore you to listen to another one of our podcasts that will be much more beneficial to you. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the Black Lives Matter mini-series. Let's get into it right now.
At this time of coronavirus, the underbelly of foul structural inequality and racism has been exposed. Yes. Whether it's in work, education, or housing, the stench of inequality and injustice permeates all. And the inequality stinks. The inequality and the injustice we've heard about so movingly today in our schools, in our housing, in the workplace, even in our beloved NHS framework. I work in our local hospital. Black and brown men and women have been at the forefront of this pandemic, working precarious, low-paid jobs in healthcare, in social care. Alongside their white working class colleagues and treated as an afterthought by Boris Johnson. How dare he clap every Thursday night? How dare he?
Like, keep signing petitions, keep standing up for people, keep going to protests, write letters to government officials, write to the education system. Like, that's a big one. Write to the education system, because I think recently they revoked a petition to involve Black, Asian and Latin history within the history curriculum. And for me, I was there like, but why? That makes no real sense, because all of these people exist within the UK. Why is their history not reflected in what we're learning in school? Because the likelihood is, if it was and reflected accurately, we may not be having some of the issues that we're having with people today, because a lot of it is learned. Like, when you're in environments that only teach you something, that's what you take in, that's what you ingest. So if you never learn about like Nubian kings or queens, or learn about, brilliant emperors or empresses, or like people who did like phenomenal things in different parts of the world, not to say that learning about, King Henry VIII and World War I and World War II, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Those are all important, and I'm not rejecting that fact at all. But all of these other things that have been happening in this world historically are just as important, and I feel like they should be on the curriculum. Yeah. Like, what's your view on that?
I agree with you. That's something that I thought of for sure, in that, especially when it comes to Black history, we're taught of slavery in America. And again, that is what I learnt about in school, because that was the curriculum. And I think we rely on the curriculum to be taught about important things, and we rely on, out of the education system, we rely on the news to cover important topics. And I think one of the most important things you said there is to represent the histories accurately. And I think that is one of the things that lacks in the education system here, is that, Black history is not Black American history. There's Black history everywhere. And also, I've spoken to you about this, but there's so much to say on Black history in the UK, but then there are so many, you know, we're taught in primary school, secondary school, people to celebrate in history.
Yeah.
And I have never seen a person of colour in my education be celebrated. And again, only now that this information is circulating am I seeing it for the first time. And it just speaks volumes that I'm 22 and for the first time being taught about the, like, I saw something on different inventions by people of colour, and like these are things that I use in my everyday life, and
Yep.
without them, like, I would be screwed. And I didn't know, and I'm glad I do know now. And I think that's one thing, it's never too late to educate yourself. Like, you can research, you can, I mean, like, careful with your sources, but you can definitely find the information out there. It's just that we can't rely on our education system, unfortunately, to represent people of colour accurately and to celebrate them as well.
Because, like, if you was to look back in history, there is a man whose name I can't quite remember at the moment, but he is called the father of modern day gynecology, which has been, you know, represented in like history and being like, woo, look at him, he's amazing. I'm not doubting that he is amazing, because without him, so many women, you know, they've been helped, and I'm here for it. But in order for him to get to where he is with the status of being the father of modern day gynecology, he viciously experimented on Black female slaves without any anesthetic whatsoever. So in order to have the things that we have today, lots of things have been, you know, tested on slaves. So you know, at the time, specifically in slavery, lots of slaves were seen as the same as animals. So when people are still now protesting against, you know, animal testing, which I think, you know, stop animal testing people, but at that time they were testing those same kinds of things that they would have done on animals on Black people. And when you have that kind of relation, like you're saying that, oh, Black person, just like an animal, they're like a beast. It's really, really mad. And unfortunately, those kinds of thought processes have not changed. When I'm watching the news and they're talking about a group of Black boys who have done something, they talk about them as if they are animals. Recently, with all of the things that are happening with refugees coming over, which we 100% should be helping them, and I don't understand why our government is so disgustingly, you know, blind to it. They will look at a situation and be like, oh yeah, all these people coming over in tiny dinghies, oh yeah, and they're stupid for trying to save their lives and their families. But if you were to flip that on its head, hi Boris Johnson, if you flip that on its head and it was you, and you were coming from a country that was war-torn or completely in absolute decimation, wouldn't you want a country to accept you, to be safe, to be protected, instead of just being brought with all of this hostility and hatred? And I feel like the way in which people are spoken about in the media is very telling of how people really think about them. Because even with everything that has happened recently in Lebanon, I was watching Channel 4, and the way that they described humanitarian aid, getting humanitarian aid out to the people of Lebanon, they said, and when I heard this, I brought this up with my parents. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Because the phrase fed and watered, when you hear that, you think of cattle or animals, because that's what you do. You go and feed the animals, you go and give them some water. But they use that phrase for a whole country. They were saying that, oh, we need to get the people of Lebanon fed and watered. And to me, I sat back and was like, why are you describing a whole country as if they're animals? They have just gone through something that is absolutely disgusting. They should never have gone through that. That explosion should never have happened. And on top of that, they're going through so much like unrest within their country that it's like, wow, like, they're already down. Like, you don't need to keep hitting them whilst they're down. So I feel like there is so much work that needs to be done. And this leads me perfectly on to my next question. Like, has your relationship with the media, the news, with everything that's been happening recently, has that changed?
It definitely has. I was aware of bias in media and especially on the news. But it was more like political bias that I was aware about, sort of, you know, different parties wording things certain ways to get a vote. And I think that more recently I have, like, the George Floyd was covered, but again, I remember thinking whilst I was looking at the news, or waiting for it to come onto the news, that it took it just took too long for there to be airtime on it. And I think another thing that I kept a really close eye on was the protests, because I mean, I read so many articles online from like different random articles, and the wording that each article used, explaining the same protests, each one made it sound like it was a different event. And so I definitely believe that you can't always believe what you see, and you cannot always trust the words that have been put in front of you. I know that a lot of protests, sort of the violence is exacerbated, and I know that I read one article, and the heading of it was that protesters clashed with the police, and that was the heading. But if you read the article, it was like right-wing individuals that clash with the police. And for those that are just sort of like brushing through the headlines, they're thinking, oh, the Black Lives Matter protesters, they're out here causing trouble. And it's just words in the media, like, they have massive influence.
100%.
And that is why I think the voices in media that we listen to, we have to be so careful in like knowing what angle they are coming from, for sure.
Yeah, like, I agree, because like, as you said, like, lots of people have these biases. They have these biases and they project it into what they're saying and telling people, and they twist it in a way that makes it seem like it's factual. And I think if
are feeding biases that are already there, and making the problem even worse as well. Like I said, if somebody just read protesters clashing with the police, if they already had a bias within them, and it's like making the problem more deeply rooted. For sure. Sorry to cut you off again.
That's okay. No, because I remember there was a protest in London, and luckily there was enough people there to capture the footage of what actually happened. But how they reported it on the news, this was the time where there were policemen and women on horses, and there was this big outrage of people being like, oh no, how dare these Black Lives Matter protesters throw bottles at the horses. And you read that and you're like, okay. But then you watch the video clips of what happened from various different angles. Firstly, the police did not need to be on those horses. They just didn't. They could have, managed it just being on foot. If anything really badly got out of hand, you call for backup. Simple. Nothing actually would have got out of hand if those police officers didn't charge at the people who were peacefully protesting. When you stand in someone's face being like, you shouldn't be here, you shouldn't do this, da, 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 of course they're going to get upset. Like, they're protesting genuinely for their lives. Like, there's, as they are saying Black Lives Matter, they are there saying, hey, my life actually does matter. Like, I know you don't see that my life matters, but I'm telling you, I'm crying out to you that my life does matter. And the fact that it happened, and like loads of people were outraged, and I remember seeing people like posting about it, being like, "Oh no, these Black Lives Matter protests have gone too far now. They're abusing animals." When you look at it completely from every angle, you will actually realize that if the police made the right decision and were not on those horses because they didn't need to be, nothing like that would have happened. Like, yeah, like potentially a bottle may have got thrown, because there's always going to be someone who takes it too far. There's always going to be that minority who does take it too far, and we get that, we know that. But it was genuinely like whipped up by those people in that area to be like, you were kind of, you know, fueling the fire. So when it happened, and there was even a clip where there was a policeman on a horse, and the horse charged. The horse charged, and the policeman got knocked off from a traffic light, got knocked off a traffic light, and only part of that clip was properly shown on the news, and it was kind of made to look like the protesters startled the horse for the reason to make sure that that police officer was knocked off, which wasn't the case. It simply was because, obviously, if you're on horses and there are loads of people there, a horse is going to get startled. That is basic logic of, you know, how horses are. And the fact that they didn't take that into consideration is crazy to me. And yeah, I just think that there's so much to unpack, obviously, within the policing system, within the education system, as we were saying earlier, because it's just, there are so many biases everywhere. And I've been just seeing so much on the news, on like This Morning, Loose Women, all of these shows. I mean, I'm at home being furloughed. Like, I've got all the time to watch all these TV shows in the day now. But it's like watching them and seeing like different biases being put forward to different people's opinions, being like, yeah, I think this, or you should believe this, is, some of them can be quite damaging. Some of them I'm like, okay, like, basically, if I hear Piers Morgan speak, I just take everything he says with like a whole like vat of salt, because it's like, you're going to say something that's probably going to be controversial, and fine, like, that's who you are. Sometimes he says something and I'm like, I actually agree. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes I'm like, I agree. And it's like, in the same way, like, we have people like Katie Hopkins that still have platforms and all her platform is dedicated to is just spewing hate. That's it. There's nothing kind or good or lovely about anything that she's doing or putting out into the world. Like, even, you know, the people who she's, you know, sworn to be, you know, best friends with, even she throws like hate towards them, and it's like, so what are you doing? Like, and why do you even have this kind of big platform where you can speak to so many people? But unfortunately, the reason she has that platform is because there are loads of people who have those exact same opinions, which is another issue within itself.
I think with what you were saying, like, the fact that people ate up these the horses getting spooked at the, like, that just says, it just speaks volumes, because that was a Black Lives Matter protest with such an important message, and that everybody's talking about police horses again. The conversation is silenced, and something else is put above it, and even more so, an animal has been put above it again. Like, with what we've spoken about, it's just like dehumanizing to me. Like,
So Ella, we're gonna like bring this to an end in a little bit. I just want to know, when you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, what does it mean to you?
to me, it has meant self-reflection. I think when it comes to the phrase Black Lives Matter, it is worded perfectly, and there should be no argument against that. I know that there's been a lot of controversy with people saying all lives matter. Exactly how I've looked into things and been taught, Black Lives Matter, that's exactly what it means. Black Lives Matter to me, Black Lives Matter. That's what I'm trying to put into words. But for me, what the Black Lives Matter movement has brought about is self-reflection. So yeah, that's what it means to me.
Also, like, it's such a bold, powerful statement, because like I'm hoping, and like my fingers, my toes, my eyes, my everything is crossed, because I'm hoping that one day we'll get to a place where, you know, Black lives actually do matter. Like, you know, when Ava grows up, and like hopefully she won't have to deal with the amount of racism that exists now. Like, that's like my hope for the future, but it's going to be a long journey to get there, because there is so much work that has to be done.
Yeah. And I'm like, just like you said, with all of the conversations that are going on, I look forward to seeing what the future looks like as Ava gets older, because like you said, everything crossed, it will be a better future, and a better reality than what is going on now, for sure.
Definitely. So thank you so much, Ella, for being on today's podcast. I really, really appreciate you. And also, I appreciate Ava for making her appearance. Like, let's be real, she was the star of the show today.
Thanks for dealing with me and my mum brain as well.
No, it's completely fine. And I just appreciate you so much. Guys, as always, if you are struggling with your mental health, because obviously right now it is so difficult, on top of being in lockdown, being in our houses and everything, seeing so much Black trauma consistently, because there are still Black people being killed every single day. There are links down in the description below for you to get some free help with your mental health that we're really hoping will really come in handy right about now. But yes, Ella, thank you once again for being on. Appreciate you so much. Thank you for joining us on Fantastic Allies and Where to Find Them right here on the Oxfordshire Youth Podcast. We will see you very, very soon. Bye, guys.